we find that we discover the truth everywhere. Memory is a feature of consciousness. Consciousness is the great mystery that we are now decoding, that we are now realizing and exploring. And so I commend everyone for being here to make a space in your journey to feed your spiritual needs. And we are dedicated in this service to supporting you, giving your strength on your journey, supporting you in discovering the fulfillment of knowing the truth. Now, to make it through these times of an emerging paradigm, when old systems are collapsing, when things are shifting, when people are waking up and things are uneven, to get through this, we have to remember to take things lightly, to step back, go gently, with forgiveness, kindness, and gentleness all the time. And it's made doubly difficult by the fact that the paradigm we're in doesn't work. So if you can recognize that, yeah, we don't have a system that really works, that gives everyone humanity, fairness and justice everywhere, and fair distribution of resources. But that is the vision, and we can do it. And so I light this candle for the spirit of truth that lives eternally in every soul. We love the lore of our history. We love every little story about who did what, because these people were so really humble. They were not charismatic. They did not demonstrate any special, miraculous, shocking eventuality. They were just very progressive, serious seekers of enlightenment and truth. So today's lesson is, who were the Fillmores? Charles and Fillmore are the co-founders of Unity. Now it's interesting that Unity is not founded by either gender, a woman or a man, but by both. And for a long time I was only aware of Charles, really, because my mother was out there when he was still living. She talked about Papa Charlie all the time. She never talked about Myrtle. But it got to be a real thing. If you're going to be a Unity leader, if you're going to study spiritual teachings of Unity, you must say Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, and talk about Myrtle's part in it, because she actually got the insight first. She was praying for healing out of a class she attended, and she received the idea, I'm a child of God. Therefore, I do not inherit sickness. I inherit all that God is, health, wealth, eternal life. And so she realized she'd spent her whole life telling her body, oh, I'm going to die of tuberculosis because everyone else in my family has, and I have a propensity toward having tuberculosis because I've inherited that. So she undid that thinking gradually, and after 2 years, she was completely healed. She had been told to get her affairs in order when she attended that class at the age of about 41. And Charles witnessed this, and he says, well, if there's anything to this, I'm going to find out for myself. And so he started to pray in the silence, and he made huge discoveries in the silence, okay? But just to talk about who they were in the world as personalities, they were very progressive for their time. Myrtle's family was a stop on the Underground Railroad. So they did hide runaway slaves in their home during her lifetime, that she remembers that as a child. She was born in 1845. She died in 1931. Now, she was the 7th child of 8, and her father was an Ohio businessman farmer. And I said incorrectly last year that her hometown was Page, Ohio. It was Page Town. It was named after her family, Page Town, and she was Myrtle Page was her maiden name. Now, at the age of 21, she enrolled in a one-year literary course for ladies at Oberlin College. And after graduated in 1867, she taught in public schools in Clinton, Missouri for 13 years. She met her future husband, Charles Fillmore, when she was recovering from a particular difficult time with the tuberculosis. She went to Denniston, Texas in 1877, and she was attending a literary meeting for the discussion of transcendentalism, and Charles came to that, and that's where they met. They corresponded for several years, and they married in 1881. How old was she then? 36. And she had a child the very next year, and then 2 years later, 82, 84, and 89. She had her third son at 44. So she was kind of a late bloomer, but she made up for it, didn't she? Now, Charles never went to school after he suffered a prolonged illness from having an infection in his hip that got dislocated when he was 10 years old. Skating, and it resulted in him being lame because the leg stopped growing, and not only could he not go to school, he had to support his mother. When he was a child, the father disappeared, and he was able to do this. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why in his pictures he looks so serious, because he did take on a lot of responsibility for a young man, especially with a young man with a leg that was not properly, it was shorter than the other leg, and he always limped. It's very tiring. And he said it was constant pain also, which did go away through his life as he was praying for healing later on when he was really become a spiritual leader. He said that the leg started growing and the pain dissipated. But in his youth, first he worked as what they call a printer's devil. This was such a handy skill to learn because he did learn how to do typesetting and publishing. And then he worked in the library on the Indian reservation where he was born, and he was tutored by the librarian. And being such a quick learner, such a marvelous mind that he had, by the time he left that, and went out to work full time, he had learned Shakespeare, the philosophers, science. He had just had a marvelous education under the tutelage of this librarian who he had a very close relationship with. It was a very loving situation, and he was an open student. So here we have two people who, for their time, they were really searching and wanting to learn all of the most high vibration, I'll say, ideas that were around. And that took them to transcendentalism. Now, what is transcendentalism really? I found that in doing research for this talk, I wished I would have majored in philosophy in college, because I don't know what a lot of the different philosophers are teaching. And when a word is used to describe it, I don't know what the words mean. But so if you want to become a unity minister, maybe you should go to college and major in philosophy. I don't know. But anyway, here's what transcendentalism is as far as I can understand it. An idealistic, philosophical, and social movement. Now, by idealistic, that means that it says that we want to strive for the highest good, okay? Ideals, all right. So, philosophical and social movement that developed in New England in reaction to rationalism. Rationalism was kind of the no-nonsense, non-compassionate, flat thinking of intellect. So you can see it was kind of like the romanticism reacting to the intellectualism. Influenced by romanticism, Platonism, and Kantian philosophy. Now I did look up Kant. Whatever it said, I don't remember. But it has to do with man being capable of of cooperating and creating good in the world. It taught that divinity pervades all nature and humanity, and its members held progressive views on feminism and communal living. Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau were central figures. Now, we've all heard of Emerson and Thoreau, yes? But why haven't we learned more about transcendentalism? I'll tell you why. Because transcendentalism doesn't fit into the categories that we have in our learning model. It's not literature because it's too kind of woo-woo. You know, the academic world will not accept the writings of Thoreau and Emerson as literary because it's too religious. It doesn't fit into theology because it doesn't really have any theological construct. It just has vague references to like the oversoul. And it's not philosophy because it's not a complete system of reason. Do you see that? So it just didn't fit in. It didn't fit into theology, it didn't fit into philosophy, and it didn't fit into literature. So it got pretty much left out. And only those who have taken on, you know, I want to know what transcendentalism is, and I want to understand it, have really been able to learn about it, and that was the Fillmores. They did that. But I'll tell you how how transcendentalism permeated into the culture. Everyone has read Little Women, have they not? Everyone has read pretty much Little Men. But Little Women is enough. Which was written by who? And who was Louisa May Alcott? The daughter of one of the main transcendentalists. Yeah, Alcott was one of the main associates of Ralph Waldo Emerson. And his daughter grew up around these conversations. And she transmuted them, she transmitted them into her fictional writings, which were loved by the entire world, were they not? And uplifting, and you can see the idealism in the underlying thoughts and attitudes of her fiction. She was such a beloved writer, Louisa May. And I think it's a much more practical resource to lift us up from the ideas in transcendentalism to be in our fiction, to be in our beloved fiction that permeates our culture. So then looking at the Fillmores, they were not charismatic. You know, people didn't just follow them because they were saying extraordinary things and being extraordinary. In fact, they taught that personality was not a spiritual quality or a spiritual dynamic. One of the chapters in Lessons in Truth says personality and individuality, saying that we don't want to be dominated by the personality or allow ourselves to be dominated by the personalities of other people, nor do we want to dominate. That life is beyond our personal needs, our personal context, and personal importance. And I think that that's part of the relationship Unity has with Jesus Christ, is that there's less emphasis on the personality of Jesus in the Unity teachings and in all of New Thought, and more emphasis on the idea of the Christ that Jesus expressed and that all of us possess. The Fillmores did not bring a new revelation or an astonishing happening. In Charles Fillmore's opening statement to the catalog of courses that he first published, he says, Unity is a link in the great educational movement inaugurated by Jesus Christ. The truth that we teach is not new, neither do we claim any new revelations. We merely seek to use and prove the eternal truth taught by the Master. So you can see that he didn't really have anything startling to shake the world up with, and yet he was an amazing creator of thought. He was an amazing wordsmith. Isn't that a beautiful statement? A link and the great educational movement inaugurated by Jesus Christ. Now, I would say, too, not only they were not charismatic, they did not bring a new revelation, they were not leaders. You know, they didn't get out there and organize stuff and say, everybody come to this and come to that. They more responded to people responding to their activity of prayer. Almost worked like a magnet. Myrtle was a woman of letters, and her letters, her healing letters, are compiled in a book. The first healing letters that she wrote to people who wrote in asking for prayer from silent unity. She was a beautiful writer. And Charles was a thinker who invited peers to express their ideas. He was always offering, and I try to do this too, he was always offering a platform, an arena for people to come and share their insights into spiritual awakening. He was very much into what we would call consciousness evolution, although in their time they called it unfoldment. You know, your spiritual unfoldment. Unfoldment is not a word, it's not in the dictionary. So we've kind of switched over to spiritual evolution, the evolution of consciousness, but it is an unfolding process. Now, who were their heroes? Who were the heroes of Charles and Myrtle? You know who he was always referring to? Edgar Cayce. And why? Because to Charles, Edgar Cayce was the living embodiment of the proof that we are all part of one mind. That's how Edgar Cayce could get information that was not available by ordinary means, because he tapped into the one mind. And Charles was teaching that we can all do this. It wasn't only Edgar Cayce, but he was in sort of a process of evolution. He was one of the first to reach that far shore of tapping into universal consciousness. Now, another one of their heroes was Richard Morris Buck. Do you know who he is? He is the author of a book called Cosmic Consciousness that was published in 1901. And he was a Canadian psychiatrist, and his theory was that human consciousness is evolving to a state where all humans will be living in this unity consciousness, what he calls unity consciousness, and that certain people throughout the ages have had this experience, and it's quantifiable. So then he describes cases of people that he theorizes had the experience of cosmic consciousness. And the interesting thing he says is that there is evidence after the experience of kind of seeing into the cosmos and seeing that everything is one and you're part of that oneness, that people come back from it with several qualities. One is their countenance seems more radiant. Another is they have a more clear, a moral character. It cleanses or it clarifies the moral character. And another one is that they have no fear of death. So he theorized that the Buddha was someone who had this experience of cosmic consciousness, Shakespeare, Jesus Christ, the great poet, Walt Whitman, and he himself felt that he had had this experience. So his book called Cosmic Consciousness was a staple in every Unity class, Unity work. I know that our Unity Center of Christianity in Washington, D.C., the three main books we had on hand were the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, Lessons in Truth, and Cosmic Consciousness by William Buck. Now, more of the heroes of the Fillmores, the Greek philosophers, they were always referring to the work of Socrates and Plato in terms of truth being captured in those thoughts. Shakespeare being one who rendered in his literary creations the human condition in all of its depth and in all of its power. And then atomic science. Fillmore, I don't recall any names. He might have mentioned Einstein, but it was a little early for that. But he was very much aware of atomic science and the blueprint that the atom held as a universal symbol of creation. And he integrated that into his work. What were they opposed to? They were opposed to superstition. Charles never taught anything from the platform that could not be verified scientifically, rationally. He did not talk about angels. He did not talk about anything woo-woo, really, much, although his teachings are completely spiritual, metaphysical, transcendent. But he didn't get caught up in superstition, I'll just say. And channeling. They were opposed to channeling. They said everyone has direct access to God. They don't need an intercessor. However, channeling is such a broad, widespread gift that we share channeling with everyone now. They've backed off from that. It's a very great blessing. Many of our own congregants are very skilled channelers. They were opposed to relics. Material objects that contain any spiritual power. And one time, a rumor got started that there was a page that was printed with red on the background of the page, red ink. Somehow a rumor got started that page had healing powers. You could put it on your body and it would heal you. And there was a big rush for the magazine to tear out the red page. And Charles Fillmore had to take a very strong stand to say, no, we don't teach. It's not true. Don't get caught up in putting your faith in outer things. And, I want to cite to you a possible scenario that Charles Fillmore could have influenced. Talking about a relic. Walt Disney was in Kansas City up to 1929, and at that point he went out to Hollywood. But in those early years, Charles Fillmore was broadcasting a radio show called Unity Viewpoint every Sunday night. He sold the radio station in 1929. But up until that time, he was broadcasting Unity Viewpoint in Kansas City, and Walt Disney was probably listening. And here he goes to Hollywood, and he comes up with this story of Dumbo. If you know the story, Dumbo is an elephant who is afraid. He has to fly to save his life. He doesn't think he can fly. And so this little mouse gives him a red feather and says, this is a magic feather. You can fly if you have this feather. So he flies with the red feather. Are you with me? You remember this? Does that sound like it's right out of mental science? And then he loses the feather and he thinks he can't fly. And the whole story is that when he's convinced that the feather was a lie, that Timothy the mouse told him that just to save him, but he didn't need that feather to fly, and he really could fly. It was a great step forward. And that's us in our spiritual journey of putting our faith in outer things. And you have the power to fly without a feather. You are an individualized expression of divine consciousness. You are the Christ. You are truly the image and likeness of love itself. Amen. Got you into a place where you feel that oneness, that perfection, that power, that light, which then allows you to relax, which then puts you into comfort and assurance. To know that God's loving arms are always around us. To feel that deep peace is always there for us. To give thanks that our bodies are wondrously made, self-cleansing, self-healing. And so we relax in comfort. We breathe deeply the breath of life moving through us, oxygenating our cells, opening neural pathways, as we enter the inner closet to pray to the Father in secret, the within. Our statement for focusing today is, I am the perfect expression of the divine. And so let us vocalize that now together. I am the perfect expression of the divine. And say that silently in your heart. To know the truth of myself. To rest in that assurance. As God does reveal now all that we need for each step, for each thought, to be bathed in the spirit of truth, in the silence. Arise, shine, for thy light has come. We rise up as we are called to come forth to be all that we are created as, the image and likeness of you, God. And so it is. Amen. Thank you.